Welcome to episode 18 of Civil War Breakfast Club. I'm your co-host, Mary, also known as Ho Ho Howard for this episode, and I am joined by my awesome co-host, Darren Weeks, also known as Jingle Bell Hood.
Ho, 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 elf from the north. I'll have to ask, have you been good this year or not? So I'll leave that question alone. But I guess we'll find out that whole thing.
You tell
but
me.
Hey, no, we'll see. We'll see how Santa Claus comes next week, Mary. I guess we'll see what he brings us. See if you're going to get a big old lump of coal, which you Canadians probably use for heat up there.
Anyway, we are here for our first annual Santa Claus Civil War Breakfast Club Christmas Spectacular.
Just before we get to the Yuletide joy here, I think we got to go back and talk a little bit about the last episode, right?
We do,
which is great. Let's put a bow on that one. And what we'll do is we'll talk about Fredericksburg Battle, which I thought was a good one, which just ended as we sit here 158 years later.
Yep.
But I think we can turn our eyes to Santa and the elves and the reindeer and all the fun stuff that comes with Christmas and how it affected the Civil War. People don't realize that Christmas was really spurred on by the Civil War.
It was. But the first thing we have to talk about, though, and one of the things that brings holiday cheer, is drinking beer.
Certainly is. Good segue. So what are you drinking tonight?
So my first beer is Double Exposure from Cowbell Brewery, which is a local brewery. And then my next one is Hazy Sunset, which is a New England IPA from Bayfield Brewing Company, just like 15 minutes away from my house. And I am drinking it out of my George Henry Thomas mug because today is the anniversary of the Battle of Nashville, and which is a 2-day battle, and it's where he becomes known as, I believe it's the Sledgehammer.
Ooh,
so he graduates from rock to sledgehammer.
Wow, sounds like a tough one there. Anyway, I am drinking in Christmas spirit the No Santa IPA. Now again, we know this is not true. It's just the name of a beer, so kids at home don't freak out. I'm changing gears today, Mary. Instead of a mug, I'm drinking it out of my Foursquare Beer Company Christmas beer glass because I am in a Christmas mood today, Mary. And then my next beer will be the Harpoon Winter Warmer, which is a cinnamon and nutmeg holiday ale. So we're all very, very festive today.
We are, yes. And we will definitely be festive for our Facebook Live on Saturday morning as well.
We certainly will. I think we'll look forward to that. Can you believe it's Christmas already?
Week from Friday. Yeah. Wow. That's crazy. Speaking of our Facebook Live, we had a really, really good one on Saturday. Thanks to everybody who came out to that. There was lots of good discussion, and we will be doing it again next Saturday, as we mentioned.
This next one will be fun talking. I think people will be a good holiday type mood. As this episode drops on Saturday, we'll have once again in our rear view mirror of our sleigh, we will have another roundtable, which is we will be recording tomorrow as we sit here, but we anticipate a good time as well as we'll be doing books and other, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's fun to look at some different things, Mary. We've the last couple of episodes, we've really been in some of the more darker, deeper battles, depressing battles, right?
And Fredericksburg. It's good we're doing a lighthearted one, especially considering just what's been happening around the world with the pandemic and people not being able to gather for the holidays like they usually do. And I think it's also going to be one where we can kind of reflect back to the Civil War and see that, you know, they were going through similar struggles to us, not being able to get home to spend time with loved ones and all that. And I think it's drawing a really interesting parallel. But as you said, to segue into our Christmas episode, you said that what we know as Christmas was born during the Civil War.
It was. And Christmas, back then, to your point, it was a very happy day, but it was also a very sad day. And people don't realize, like Thanksgiving, Christmas was it was a minor holiday before the Civil War. I mean, it's nothing like it is today. It wasn't even a national holiday. Do you know, Mary, in the 1700s, Massachusetts, my state, imposed fines on people who celebrated Christmas? Do you know that?
Really?
Yeah, it was mostly Puritans and Calvinists in the state. Big Festivus state, okay? A lot of feats of strength. How do you think those pilgrims lived for that rock of Plymouth, Mary? But seriously, though, it was you could actually be fined in Massachusetts for celebrating Christmas back in the 1700s. Schools were open, businesses were open, everything was open. It was just kind of a minor holiday. It did start to grow, though, in the 1800s. It started to take on some more importance. You started to see some of the more Christmas traditions, the Christmas tree and St. Nicholas. Jingle Bells was written in 1851.
It was,
okay.
Yep.
But you know what it was? It was a fun, but it was a secular holiday. It wasn't based on religion. It was basically kind of like Thanksgiving is now, an excuse to get together and eat and drink and be with family. That's what Christmas was. Civil War changed everything. It did a full 180.
Oh, it absolutely did. Another thing that spurred it along too was just traditions that were being brought from Europe by immigrants, be they from like Germany or England or wherever, because they obviously celebrated Christmas over there. And like you just had Christmas Carol, written by Charles Dickens and published in 1843. That is only about not even 20 years old when the Civil War breaks out. Like you said, carols like Jingle Bells as well. Deck the Halls was out before the Civil War. O Come All Ye Faithful. It Came Upon a Midnight Clear. We Three Kings, and Up on the Housetop. I was surprised about Up on the Housetop came out. It was, I think, written in 1861 or around that time.
I was surprised Santa got run over by a reindeer came out then too.
Isn't that Grandma got run over by a reindeer?
Oh, that's right. Grandma got run over. We'll just edit that one right out. Anyway, another fail. But it did take a more important thing. And you know what? It was an interesting thing because it was a holiday that was important because of families at home, but also soldiers in the field, right? And if you spend some time reading the soldier diary, and what it would basically do is you can read about Christmas messages in every single one of them. Every single one of them had something. There was one by a guy named Nathaniel Dawson, 4th Alabama. You know who his wife was, Mary?
No.
Elodie Todd, the sister of Mary Todd Lincoln, which we don't call Mary Todd Lincoln anymore because of you. We just call her Mary Lincoln.
Hey.
But it was.
I'm just going by what I was told.
I know, it's okay. But he wrote in his diary. It's just, and it kind of explains, because I wish I could be with you on Christmas, the festal season when age is rejuvenated and lives again in the merry carols of youth. Then he goes, bad whiskey is advantant, and pleasure and sorrow are drowned in large potations. He talks about how these guys were sad and lonely and away from home, but they still did what they could to have fun.
They're still getting loaded, right? I read one account where there was a Confederate soldier. He got a bottle of some kind of alcohol. He invited them into his tent and he was like, oh yeah, we're going to drink all this. He thought it was brandy. And then they opened it and somebody had got a hold of it and put water in it instead. He said in his diary, I hope the Yankee who played that practical joke lived to repent it and was shot before the war ended. So
yeah, it's a funny story, because it's that story. It's the rumor is that the Yankee pickets got it, drank all the whiskey, filled with water, and said send it. And that, you know what? Well played.
Yeah, good for them. Because come on, the Confederates would have done the same fucking thing to them. So.
Of course they would. But speaking of the South and the Confederacy, it was interesting in Christmas in the South as well, because the slave owners, they kind of use this day as kind of a token celebration with their slaves, and probably a absolving guilt situation. They let them have a party and they gave them alcohol and all that stuff, and the slaves would probably pretend to be happy and life was great. But the Southerners, and you can picture this happening right now, is they blamed the North, the Yankees, on the lack of gifts that they received. So, there's a book by the name of James Allen Martin. He wrote a book called The Children's Civil War. And he talked about a lot of different stories. Howell Cobb from the Southern Storm, Mary, from the beginning of that. So he was a Confederate general in the Georgia Reserves, one of the founding fathers of the Confederacy, actually. He was former governor of Georgia. He fought Sherman in the March to the Sea, 1864. One of his slaves was kind of mocking his kids. And they basically said, don't you expect a visit from Santa Claus this year? The Yankees shot him. That's what they.
I did read that story.
Yeah, that's what Howell Cobb sleeps. And so, and then you had stories of Southern parents were telling the kids that Santa Claus was being held up by the rebel pickets, the Union naval blockade. So that's why they didn't get their Xboxes and all this stuff.
And their Legos. They had to settle for Megos.
The Megos. And you talked about this. It all goes back to the Megos.
Mega balls.
It's one of those things you can see them doing that. I mean, the economics was really, really bad at the time. But I mean, again, families, they had to deal with their husbands or their brothers or their sons' absence at the war. And, and it's, you read some of these diaries like we talk about all the time. It is kind of depressing if you think about it. A woman named Sally Brooke, she was a woman sympathizer in Richmond. She said, never before has so sad a Christmas dawned upon us, right? It was obviously on their minds. You can kind of see like this bittersweet type of holiday where it's a festive type thing, but you got the empty chair, or at least one, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And there was many different illustrations done, say in Harper's Weekly, most notably by a man named, is it Thomas Nast?
Thomas Nast.
Thomas Nast. He was a German immigrant, but he became a very famous editorial cartoonist, or at least that's what we would call him today. So he is the one that kind of popularized the image of Santa that we now have of this fat, jolly guy. But he also did images of, like there was one I saw of like a wife praying at like at a window, then her husband is a soldier just in the field sort of thing, and it was titled like Christmas Eve, and they're absolutely beautiful sketches that he's done, but they're very powerful. But then he did a lot of political ones too. He did one of Santa where Santa's dressed up and, you know, he's got like the stars and stripes on, and it's a very much like sort of like think Santa meets Captain America kind of thing, where it's very political.
He ain't the one who drew the picture of Santa giving the sword to the cavalry guy. Then that wasn't him. You know, seen that picture?
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Was that where Nathan Bedford Forrest is getting a fucking sword from Santa?
I think that
was the weirdest thing.
But Thomas Nast, Harper's Weekly had a gigantic impact in this country. It was the most popular magazine by far of the time. And they did a real good job of helping boost morale and uplifting spirits. And the pictures you mentioned, the one, the dual circle ones with the wife praying at the window, and there's the one of the soldier at the camp, and he's looking all forlorn. To your point, the image we know of Santa Claus today is his image.
Yep.
So when you see Santa Claus at the mall, you could thank Thomas Nast, who actually was a German. He wasn't even American. He might even known Oh Mary or Ho Ho, I should say.
Ho Ho Howard.
He might have been friends with Ho Ho Howard. Even U.S. Grant, after the war, realized the impact he made psychologically in this country with trying to keep everybody up. He's quoted, he says, Nast did as much as any man to preserve the Union and bring an end to the war. They only really had these articles, these pictures, and that's what they had to go by. And then when you started seeing those war dead pictures starting to come home and all that, you can sort of see how the psychology and the morale was just down.
Well, it must have been so tough for not just on the home front, but the soldiers in the field. And like the soldiers, they made their own traditions out there to make it feel, I guess, a little bit more like they were at home. Like there was one soldier, Alfred Bellard of the 5th New Jersey, he said, in order to make it look much like Christmas as possible, a small tree was struck up in front of our tent and decked off with hardtack and pork in lieu of cakes and oranges. So they're still trying to keep up with these traditions. Like, as you said, it kind of harkens back to that, the drinking story that you said, you know, like they're sad they're not at home, but they're making the most of it as they can with their fellow soldiers. And in some ways, that's kind of what we're having to do now. Like we're making the most of it for us here, those in our house, right?
Just imagine, I mean, most Civil War movies you see have some kind of Christmassy scene. I mean, the one in Glory, which was incorrect, the timing was wrong, but remember that whole Merry Christmas scene, Robert. There's all kinds of stories. A guy from the 1st Minnesota named James Wright, he talks about how they got beef soup for celebration. They got beef soup, that was a big deal. But he says, the men have been allowed as much liberty as consistent with discipline and were circulating among acquaintances in other regiments. I was frequently invited to smile, meaning to take a drink. So these guys were going from regiment to regiment. Just picture you're in your dorm back at your university.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
At Dairy Queen University back in kindergarten. Okay. And you're in the dorm and people are going room to room partying, knocking on the doors. Hey, that's what you imagine this is what it was. Because every one of them was kind of fighting their own inner demons about not being home.
Yeah.
Because you know, you're just somewhere you don't want to be, you're homesick. But it's not like you're away at college or on some business trip. You could be dead tomorrow, and so you don't know if you're ever going to see these people again. And just
exactly.
I don't think people could really get that, understand that, unless you're in a military type situation. Luckily, I can't. I know you can't.
No.
I mean, sure, there's definitely, everybody wants this people that they miss they can't see and around the Christmas season. We all know that. But you think about how hard that was. And Christmas, I think, in the 19th century of America, I think what it really did is it really reinforced that image of home.
It did.
Right?
Yeah. And
it really made, and it went all the way through as far as how important Christmas was. Christmas was a very uplifting mention, even to generals. I mean, the little redheaded guy, he's the one who said, I beg to present as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah, right?
Exactly. Yeah. The best Christmas gift that Abraham Lincoln probably ever received. There was also stories of, a lot of people know the story from World War I of that truce between the Germans and the British soldiers where they played soccer. Well, that happened in the Civil War too, between the Confederates and the Union. Like there was truces, at Christmas time, and they would exchange stuff, they would talk and just kind of hang out together. And there was one story I read, John Haley of the 17th Maine said, it is rumored that there are sundry boxes of mysterious parcels over at Stoneman Station directed to us. We retire to sleep with feelings akin to those of children expecting Santa Claus. There is an excitement that these guys have, even though they can't be home.
He was a solid Mainer, Mary. Another New Englander, 17th Maine, right?
Yep.
So, but again, and you gotta remember too, these guys are young, right? I mean, a guy like John Haley's probably 18, 19 maybe. Who the hell knows? But he's a kid himself. Think about it. A lot of these guys are away from home for the very first time. And it just, you imagine how difficult it must have been. Even on the family side, just talking about how hard it must have been. I mentioned Mary Chestnut's diary. And she wrote a little bit of poetry, and so I dug out her diary earlier today. Thank God there's no centerfold in that one, Mary. I'll tell you that right now.
Okay. Like Mike Claiborne biography?
Yeah, thank God there's none of that. I mean, Christmas would be ruined for everybody, be canceled if that was the case. She wrote about Christmas time, probably 1863, 64, something like that. She was a Southern sympathizer who lived in Charleston, South Carolina. A very famous diary. She wrote, "Darkest of all Decembers, even my life has known, sitting here by the embers, stunned, helpless, and alone." And it's sad, right? Mm-hmm. And you just read these things, and this is the type of feeling they had, where it's a holiday, you're festive, you're kind of smiling through your gritted teeth, and you're trying to smile, and kind of like the way you are right now, as a matter of fact. The way you are half the time I talk to you, that's another story. But I think, what these women did at home, they spent a lot of time helping soldiers, medically built, making clothes, season of giving. I mean, they did take advantage of all that. They really, really tried. But again, it's a situation where you can only do so much, right? I mean, fortunately, there weren't too many battles around Christmas. They all seemed to know just not to do anything. Granted, it was cold and it was, whatever. 2 weeks after Fredericksburg, it was Christmas in 1862.
Exactly. And I can't imagine how hard it was for the people of Fredericksburg. Their town has been looted by the Union Army. And so not only that, but they're probably having to deal with hearing about loved ones that have been killed and then dealing with the aftermath of the looting, right? Like
Boys R Us was totally cleaned out.
All the Legos were gone.
Legos are totally gone. Obviously, these young kids had to grow up quick. I mean, it's a different world. It's a different world. We talk about this stuff. You talk about the parallels, right? To even now. It's a lot of crap going on. It's Christmas, but do you think anybody's really happy right now with everything?
No, I mean, I think we're trying to be, but it's also different. But I think the thing to kind of remember is that we're all in this together and we'll get through it. And next Christmas will probably be like the ones that have come before this one that we're in now. And like the thing that made me think of that was when I was looking through Howard's memoirs to see if I could find something that he said about Christmas. So I went to the capture of Savannah to see if he said anything about how Christmas was. And around Christmas, he's writing to his family. So he writes to his wife, "I want to see the loving faces of yours and the children so much that I am really homesick." So he's so homesick at this point. And he actually goes to Sherman and he asks him if he can have leave. He just wants 2 days. He says, "I just want 2 days to go and see my family." And Sherman he responds, "General, I would give $1 million if I had it to be with my children too." That's when Howard kind of Sherman's not putting him down, but he's saying, I think he's reminding him, we're all here together. I can't go and see my family either. And here's what I would give to go see them. And I think it kind of, like Howard said after that, it kind of brought him back to reality that if the commanding general doesn't get to go see them, then he can't either. And then he probably remembered there's the soldiers too. But I think the story also shows that, Howard is very human and he had emotions and they all probably went through that. And I think it's really, you can draw a parallel to our time now where we've all had moments like that where we're like, well, this isn't fair. I just want to go see my family, and for me, I just want to be able to cross the border to see my closest friends, right? And I can't right now.
It's hard. And, you can make obviously it's a different thing, but you can make parallels to a lot of stuff today. And, not to be too somber with this, but
I'm not trying to be somber.
Bring me down. God, fine. You know what? Forget Christmas. The hell with it. It's canceled.
I was just trying to we're about making them human, right?
Yeah. Wow. Okay. But Robert Gould Shaw, 54th Massachusetts, and he wrote that quote that I mentioned before we started, which could be said today if you really think about it.
Yeah.
He wrote, "It is Christmas morning." Well, not today. It's not Christmas morning, but you know what I mean. "It is Christmas morning, and I hope a very happy and merry one for you all. Though it looks so stormy for our poor country, one can hardly be in merry humor." It could be right. That could be literally what's said today. But again, I think the point to your overall is this type of thing. Everything springs eternal, and you have to basically hope that everything's going to be fine, and it will. And just like they did back then, because if people, back then was soldiers were happy for the break, but sad and lonely, for missing their families, and vice versa. The families missed them, and
It's like right now, like it sucks that, that we can't be with people we want to be at Christmas, but we can still make the most of it because we're lucky in this world that we can, connect virtually with people. You just kind of make the most of it and try and be positive, like they were. I think that's what I pulled away from the research I did.
Well, I'll tell you what then. Why don't we try to be positive right now and have some fun? Okay, if you want to lighten you up a little bit, you want to be in a better mood now?
Fine.
Okay. All right, bringing everybody down.
I'm not the one that ended with a quote that said hardly in any merry humor.
Okay, fine. Got it. Let's play a little game here, okay? Since we're in our Christmas attire. Well, I have a hat on. You have whatever that thing is you have on.
I'm an elf.
It looks like a fruit bowl. Is that what you have wearing right now?
No, it's an elf hat.
It's an elf hat. I know it is. Let's pretend we're going to each take turns being Santa Claus, okay? I'm going to pick a general, and I'm going to tell you his background. You're going to be Ho-Ho Howard, so you're going to be Santa Claus, and you tell me if he was naughty or nice. And then you do the same thing for me, okay? I'm going to start with the great Charles Tilden. Okay, so Charles Tilden, we'll talk a little bit about him. Basically, he's a guy who ultimately come out of the Battle of Gettysburg. He's from Castine, Maine. It's a small town just right outside of Bangor. It's actually a couple towns over from Brewer, where Joshua Chamberlain is. This is a guy who basically is the other general from Maine in the Civil War. Chamberlain gets all out of the credit. He's different. He's born in a rich family, so he's born the son of a cod fisherman, and he was making big money. They ended up getting hit with a kind of a recession. They called it an economic pandemic, ironically, in 1857. Some trade issues going back and forth with the United States and overseas were stalled, and it really bled out these guys. Now, what's interesting about Tilden's family was they benefited a lot from the slave trade, these fishermen. He was somebody who was not an abolitionist, but he was someone who was just a solid patriot American. He went to Bowdoin College, of course, born in 1832. Basically, he's interesting because he went to Bowdoin, but he admittedly, he said, was basically no genius in mind or study. He wanted to be in the military. So he ended up joining or creating a small militia in the late 1850s, probably just for something to do. War breaks out, and Lincoln calls up, sends letters, for volunteers. So he basically enlists in the 1861 in the 2nd Maine Volunteers Company B. He ends up going down to Bull Run, and he obviously survives that. And he basically gets discharged and sent home. So now it's very similar to a lot of guys who kind of build their own militias at home. William C. Oates comes to mind, the 15th Alabama. He kind of raises his own regiment in Maine. He goes back to Castine and raises the 16th Maine. He's going to be their colonel, and he's going to basically recruit guys from all around the place. They're nicknamed the Blanket Brigade because they're all poor, and that's what the nickname they called them. I don't know why, but that's the nickname they had. He ultimately ends up joining the Army of the Potomac, and he's going to be in John Reynolds' First Corps and John Cleveland Robinson's division and Gabriel Paul's brigade. He's really going to make his chops at Oak Hill at Gettysburg on July 1st, 1863. This is where the good and the bad thing, Mary. So you got to pay attention, okay? So you're delving out the good and the bad here. So we'll see how it goes. Okay. Gabriel Paul's brigade is really the last one. By then, they're getting attacked hard by Robert Rhodes' division. They're getting pounded by all 5 brigades, Ramseur and O'Neill and all those guys. They're getting hit from all different directions. So finally, Abner Doubleday, who is now in charge of the First Corps because Reynolds got killed, tells Robinson, roll them up, we're out of here. Let's go. I need one regiment to stay back because we need someone to cover our retreat. And that's what he does. And so they end up picking the 16th Maine, Charles Tilden. So he says basically he's being told, you need to hold this ground at all costs. You have to basically sacrifice your regiment so the 11th Corps, the First Corps can get out. There's your answer, by the way, the 1st and the 11th Corps that broke. It was these guys. So,
I knew it.
Okay, there it is. Anywho, so finally Tilden basically tells his guys, well, we're screwed. He basically creates an L, kind of like a mini salient, right near where the observation tower is in Oak Hill. That's pretty much right where they were, right? He's getting hit from 3 different directions. So he's got Stephen Dodd Ramseur coming on one side, he's got Junius Daniel coming on the other, and he's got O'Neill coming. So he's got from 3 different directions he's getting hit now. So he holds it for about 10 minutes and finally he says, you know what? Everyone's pretty much gone. Let's get the hell out of here. So they decide they're gonna go. They ultimately get lost. They where the Pizza Hut is over there in Chambersburg Pike, seriously, is where most of them got caught. One of Tilden's deputies, one of his sergeants, says, "We can't let them get the colors." So they literally took the flags and tore them up. and stuck them in their pants, their shirts, because they didn't want to get them captured. Finally, they get caught. One of the Confederates says, hand over your sword. So he takes it and sticks it in the ground and snaps it off with a hilt and basically goes, fuck off. So he gets captured. And so just to give you an idea of how this 16th Maine was and how I'm going to say 16th is greater than 20th here, okay? 275 guys were there on that site. 40 made it out. 80% math, casualties, right? The 40 guys who survived had to join Chamberlain the next day in Round Top. So they were there. But you don't hear about the 16th. You only hear about the 20th. He gets captured. He gets taken to Libby Prison in Richmond, and he escapes. He gets the hell out of Dutch. He gets out of there. He makes it back to the Union. He ultimately gets caught again the next year at Weldon Railroad at Petersburg. They catch him again, and he escapes again. No one knows what happens to him. He disappears to history at that point. And he died in 1914, the same year as Joshua Chamberlain, by the way. Ironically, when you look just comparing the two, 83% casualties for the 16th Maine. At Gettysburg, you know how many Chamberlain had around top? 30%. So it's crazy. I mentioned before, there's a diary by the name of Abner Small, The Road to Richmond. He basically writes after the war, and this is what he says, and I quote, says, "It is no exaggeration to say, no regiment in all the army had a more scholarly commander than Colonel Tilden, nor was there one that was braver, more skillful, or cooler under all circumstances." So this is a guy who literally gave it all and survived, but then disappeared, and he's lost to history. And he's someone who just gets ignored. And his story was not even mentioned in Meade's battle report. Not one of Robinson's divisions was even mentioned in Meade's battle report. That just kind of shows how it was. So yeah, I leave it to you. Is he on the nice list or the naughty list?
Obviously, he's on the nice list, and clearly he falls into the same category as OO does, with kind of being, he's even more so lost to history than OO is. And I think that's just, something that I've found with doing this podcast with you is there's so many men like Tilden that have done these heroic kind of things, or they've done, there's somebody else that is well known, but they've done something that is equal to or greater than and just aren't known. And, like as you were telling me earlier, Tilden doesn't write memoirs.
He doesn't write memoirs.
Anything. He's just kind of lost to history.
He's buried back in Castine.
Yeah.
Just a grave that probably doesn't get visited all that much.
Yeah.
But again, he's one of these faceless guys we talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And he's a guy who really deserves more credit than he does. Not that against Chamberlain. I mean, he did great things too. But I think this is kind of the opposite of Chamberlain in Maine. This is a guy who Mainers know, especially up near Bangor, that whole area. But Chamberlain gets a lot of publicity because of the fact that Chamberlain wrote, and he wrote a lot after the war.
Exactly.
There was a lot of that, like we talked about earlier today. But again, a guy like Tilden is somebody who needs a lot more credit than he really gets. He's someone who deserves a lot more light on him. That's why he made my list.
All right.
So who do you?
Who am I? I'm going to go with James Johnston Pettigrew.
Ooh, okay.
Confederate. He's born July 4th, 1828 in North Carolina, and he's described as being very gifted. He graduates as valedictorian in 1847, and he's very good at math.
Just like you.
Yeah. And he's actually professor at National Observatory appointed by President Polk and Navy Secretary John Mason. But he leaves there after 6 months to study law. Between January 1850 and 1852, he travels to Europe, and this won't be his first trip there. This was subsidized by James C. Johnston, a friend of his father's, who gave him $50,000 to go to Europe and just kind of wander around. And between 1852 and 1861, he lives in Charleston. He's practices law. He speaks 7 languages.
You speak 7 languages, right?
Oh yeah, I totally
English, cursing, swearing, yelling,
bitching.
That's bitching, whining, crying.
Oh, all the same languages you speak.
Okay, fine.
Oh, you speak diva. You speak diva bitch.
I speak logic and brilliance, Mary.
And diva bitch.
I'm sorry, continue.
Including Arabic and Hebrew, which he taught himself Arabic with because he wanted to write about the Spanish Moors. He wanted to write a history about them. So he's very much an intellectual guy. He was also into boxing and fencing. He never married, which is quite interesting considering he is played by George Lazenby, who plays James Bond. So he's kind of like James Bond in that way.
We've talked a lot about him.
Yeah.
It was more so than Tilden has, as a matter of fact.
I know.
Still don't know who he is, by the way.
Anyway, he's a self-taught military engineer and artillerist. I draw a lot between him and Claiborne. just because the whole, like, they're not educated at West Point, but as we're going to see, like, Pettigrew does go pretty far in the Confederate Army, a lot like Claiborne does, and they're both around the same age too. During epidemics, he's said to have nursed the sick and helped out with poor people and all that and get them through times. So he does a lot of stuff like that. He's described as not a very enthusiastic secessionist, but still he's fighting for the Confederacy. He does believe that the war will be a long and drawn out affair, and he can see it kind of, he can see that the country is headed towards war. So in December of 1860, he's actually the aide to the governor of South Carolina with negotiations with Fort Sumter. So he's involved in that. But just going back a little bit, he writes a book called Notes on Spain and the Spaniards in the summer of 1859 with a glance at Sardinia. That's his book that he wrote, and it was actually released around the time of Fort Sumter. So it kind of flies under the radar, but it's a book that later on got a lot of claim because it's a travel account and history of Spain.
Was that the book he tried to peddle on Longstreet at Pickett's Charge in the movie?
Yeah, probably.
No wonder you didn't want to read it.
If he was trying to peddle a book, yeah.
Sounds brutal, actually.
His book. It was apparently anybody who read it said it was really, really good.
I know you're about to get your entire core, Carol.
But here,
we're about to read a book about Spain.
Read my book. And he actually drew a lot of parallels with Spain and the Confederacy and what they were fighting for, which is why he wrote the book. So he saw a lot of similarities between the two countries. He's appointed Chief Military Aide General Francis Pickens, and he's elected Colonel to the 1st Regimental Rifles. And he's actually, once the Civil War starts, he's recommended several times for Brigadier General, but he turns it down because he felt no one should have that command unless they've actually led troops into battle. Actually met with Jeff Davis about this. Around the Peninsula Campaign, he finally accepts that. So at Seven Pines, he's wounded through the throat and shoulder while he's advancing on the enemy, and he refused to be carried to the rear. Flash forward, this is kind of what's going to get him killed in the end. He gets his wounds bandaged only to get wounded again, and then he's reported to be dead. So his whole family's told he's dead, but he's actually been taken prisoner and he's eventually exchanged. So he ends up commanding a brigade. So he's got the 11th, 26th, 44th, 47th, and 52nd South Carolina regiments. And he fights with them in small battles in eastern North Carolina between September 1862 and spring 1863. Governor Zebulon B. Vance, I hope I'm saying that right, he petitions for Pettigrew to be assigned command in North Carolina, but he's unsuccessful because Pettigrew ends up going and being involved in the Battle of Gettysburg. And on July the 1st, he's one of the ones that drives back the Iron Brigade. I believe his brigade is going to suffer 40% casualties. Pettigrew takes over after Heath there. Said it properly.
It's Heth.
Is wounded. Pickett's Charge. He's involved in Pickett's Charge. So he's one of the guys that never gets talked about, which is why I find myself, whenever I hear Pickett's Charge, I'm kind of like, no, it's the Pettigrew Pickett Trimble Charge. Like, let's remember the other two guys that were involved. It wasn't just Virginia that got to write the history of it, right?
Well, he actually had more brigades than Pickett did.
He did. Yeah.
I mean, he had Brockenbrough.
Yeah.
Which, didn't work out too well for him. Who broke and ran. He also had Davis, who from the July first you mentioned. He had Marshall, who had been replaced up with the injuries. And he had Burkett Fry, the former 13th Alabama guy who got promoted up when Pender got mortally wounded. So he had a good brigade. And they were actually in good position. You had Trimble in the back, with Lawrence and Lane. I think what doomed them, I don't want to steal your thunder here,
No, it's okay.
But I think when Brockenbrough got pounded by the artillery on Cemetery Hill, the 8th Ohio was able to rake Davis, and the whole thing kind of fell apart on that end. But you're right, he doesn't get enough credit for Pickett's Charge. He really didn't. And he's someone, I'm sure you're going to tell his ending here, but it's something that was a real big loss for them, the Confederacy after that.
Yeah, it was so Pickett's Charge, he's got to lead by foot because his horse gets shot, and he's one of the last men to return to the Confederate lines. So he stays up there. He's one of these ones that's like Claiborne, like he's a soldier and he stays with his men, and he actually puts himself at risk. He takes a lot of heavy fire from Alexander Hayes' division. In the retreat from Gettysburg, he gets caught at Falling Waters on July the 14th. And while he's out directing his soldiers, a Union cavalryman from Michigan actually shoots him, and he's wounded through the abdomen. So same place as Claiborne that he's wounded. He refused to be left in the hands of the Federals, though, and because of that, he will die 3 days later at Edgewood Manor near Bunker Hill in West Virginia. His brigade ends up suffering a total of 56% casualties. He's 35 years old when he dies, and he was said by one to be the most promising young man of the South. So the reason I picked him, admittedly, I went into it not knowing much about Pettigrew, not knowing if I would find really good, really bad. Obviously fighting for the Confederacy, that's not a good thing, but I sometimes wonder if he would have been like a Longstreet after the war and kind of come around and seen how, the Union do what Longstreet did and Mosby, right? Like just kind of like, let's be friends, let's heal what has happened. Because I mean, we're talking about a guy that was very educated, obviously highly, highly intelligent. He was described as not a strong secessionist. So I don't know what that really means. I mean, obviously not fire eating or whatever you want to call it. I think he definitely was very, very talented. And also, the fact that he's refusing to, at first, the brigadier general, because he's like, well, I haven't fought or whatever. And I don't think that's right, that I would get that command just, assuming I'm going to be good at it or whatever. Right.
Well, I mean, he's a guy. I mean, if you've ever been a Falling Waters in West Virginia, which I get to visit last spring, and it was awesome to go there, is, he's a guy who was killed, obviously, mortally wounded during the retreat, like you mentioned, but he was charging personally a sniper, a Massachusetts guy, Mary.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it wasn't me. Where there was a guy behind a barn shooting at his soldiers, and he just went at him, and he got shot in the chest, and that was the end of him. He gets taken to Bunker Hill and ends up dying.
Yep.
But again, he's somebody who, look, I got the Confederate thing, and that's, whatever. But that was a big loss. He was a guy who told Heath, this dismounted cavalry, and they said, no, you don't know what the hell you're talking about. He was somebody who, not as big as an Albert Sidney Johnson death, obviously, that big, or obviously a Jackson death, but he's somebody who, as that second half of the war went on, we're always talking about the Confederates running out of quality generals. He's a guy who, if he's alive in 64, early 65, maybe he goes west, maybe with Longstreet, maybe he goes out there with Chickamauga, Chattanooga. Who knows, right? How that happens if he survives. So yeah, that's a big loss. And he was somebody who was very intelligent, somebody who moved up the ranks pretty quickly when he found out that he spoke 6 languages, including cursing and swearing. But he's somebody who that's a good one, Mary. Good call.
Thank you.
Didn't know it had in you.
You'd be shocked.
Whew. Okay.
So naughty or nice?
This is a tough one. You know what?
I know, because it's Confederacy, right?
You know what? I'm going to put him on the nice list and risk the scorn. Confederacy be damned. I think he's somebody who, when you're talking about some of these guys, these real hardcore dudes like the Forrests of the world or the Barksdales of the world, I think he's somebody who probably, I think to your point, he was a small S secessionalist. I think he was fighting because North Carolina was involved in it. And he's somebody who offered a lot of promise after the war. And I don't think he owned any slaves either. So I could be wrong, but I don't think he does.
No,
so
I
think I will reluctantly, maybe he only gets, he doesn't get the, he doesn't get Madden 20. Maybe he gets Madden 19, the old game. Doesn't get the new one.
He's James Bond.
Yeah, exactly.
He's single.
He'll get the. He'll get the. I know what. I'm going to buy him the toy, but I'm not going to give him the batteries just to piss him off.
You're going to get a Mega Bloks and not Lego.
I'm going to get a Mega Bloks. But I think that's a good story though. And he's somebody again like a Tilden, who I think a lot of people should study more because I think he tells a good story.
Yeah, no, he's very, I actually find just, I'm kind of taking us off the rails here a little bit, but I actually find now that I've looked at Trimble and Pettigrew a little bit more, I actually find them both a little bit more fascinating than Pickett. Like I've always found Pickett I don't need to read about Pickett. I find Trimble and Pettigrew much more interesting. And I think they need to be mentioned when you're talking about the history of Pickett's charge. You know what I mean?
Again, we talked about this before. The Virginians get to write the story, and that's the problem with this. But that's why we study this, Mayor. That's why we do this. Is people, there's more to life than just that movie, Mayor.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So he's on the nice list.
Okay.
We'll give him a warning though. That he better be better this year, John. You've been a good boy, but you've had some problems. So we'll give you the benefit of the doubt. So be good, be better next year. But I'll get you that toy this year. So.
Who's up next for you?
Well, speaking of coal and speaking of fire eaters and speaking of capital S secessionals, I decided to go with William Barksdale, Mary, just because I thought I'd try to make this a little bit easier for you. So let's talk about this guy, William Barksdale. Big supporter of slavery, Mary. Real eagerness to really beat the Yankees. He was someone who, even in a group of real pro-slavery, fire-eating bastards, this guy stood out. I mean, he just was. He was referred to by General Lafayette Santa Claus as the fiery, impetuous Mississippian. He's somebody who basically had a lot of energy, a lot of fire in him. He had long white hair. He'd ride, it would blow in the wind like an old hating Fabio blowing in the wind. And so he would basically, he basically was someone who really inspired his guys, though. He's from Smyrna, Tennessee. He was born in 1821. He went to the University of Tennessee, too, so SEC guy, I suppose. He actually went to law school, started studying law at a relatively young age. He stood next to Preston Brooks in the U.S. House of Representatives while he was caning Charles Sumner. He stood right there and watched it, right next to him.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he was right there. This is on May of 1858, right around there. So Barksdale was right there watching him, and that whole story with Preston Brooks. So basically, he ends up being a quartermaster general in the Mississippi Army when the war breaks out. 1861, he joins as colonel of the 13th Mississippi. Eventually, he got his star in August of 1862. He fought at the Battle of Malvern Hill. Didn't work out too well there. But his brigade of Mississippians, we're going to see at Gettysburg here. This is the 13th, the 17th, the 18th, and the 21st Mississippi Regiments. He's going to fight in McLaws' division of Longstreet's First Corps. And I think everyone knows his story at Gettysburg. He's going to be part of that July 2nd assault, that echelon assaults. He basically is going to attack the Peach Orchard. He's going to break through. He's going to actually have a substantial breakthrough. He's going to move up the Emmitsburg Road. And he basically is going to, he's also, before that, he's going to be Fredericksburg, Mary. We talked about last week. He was in the West Woods of Antietam. He was there as well. But obviously, Gettysburg is really where everyone knows him from, because that's where it all ended for him. So late in the afternoon, he's riding along, and he's leading his corps in the Peach Orchard. He crushes Charles Graham right there, the brigade right at the Peach Orchard. And he's riding on his horse. He basically gets his left foot shot off, and he's just kind of dragging along. He's shot again, I think, in the leg. Then he finally gets shot in the chest. This probably would have been between the Trossel barn in that area, heading back towards Plum Run, heading back towards Devil's Den, and that whole area. And then no one really knows where he fell either, but they have a general idea where he was. He dies. Some Union guys find him, and they bring him back to the Hummelbaugh house. And it's interesting about Barksdale, Mary, is that he's a Freemason, right?
Yep.
And he has Masonic buttons on his shirt. And so somebody recognizes that. The story is, and this is unsubstantiated, kind of like the Claiborne story we talked about a few weeks ago, but the story is some Union guys gave him a Masonic funeral, right?
Wow.
There's that story where I guess he had a dog. When they came to retrieve his body, the dog just kind of sat in his grave and just sat there. And I mean, you'll have to humanize the story a little bit with the guy.
Yeah.
Finally, he gets moved out, gets dug up and taken out of there, but he was buried in the Hummelbaugh house for a little while. So for him, I mean, he's a guy who, think of the Confederacy, you think of that flag, and you think of what they were fighting for. He's your guy. He's the one dude who, for better for worse, he's a pro-slavery, anti-union, pro-South. He checks all the boxes, Mary. I will defer to your forgiving heart as as Barksdale sits on your lap at the mall and begs forgiveness. Is he going to get coal, or is he going to be on the nice list? What are you going to do?
Fucking coal.
Oh, it'd be a warm Christmas in Mississippi then with all that coal.
It sure will.
I think that's the right call. I mean, he's a guy. I mean, obviously, I want to go with the good and the bad. He's an interesting story, though, because say what you will about him, and there's not much good you could say about him. He did veer off the course. I mean, some of these guys, the Mosbys, the Pettigrews, the Longstreets, their hearts softened a little bit. Yeah. This guy did not. I mean, he's Nathan Bedford Forrest gets a lot of shit, deservedly so, but Barksdale's right there with him there. He really is. Yeah. Yep.
He's getting cool.
So he's going to be a very sad Christmas morning as he wakes up in his dirt nap at the Hummelbaugh house. Actually, he's been moved since. I think he's out of Mississippi.
Dirt nap.
So anyway. All right. So we'll do one more, Mary. We'll go to one more. Jingle Bell Hood me. I'm in a good forgiving mood right now. So who do you got next?
Yeah, well, this might shock you, but I'm going to go with Jefferson Columbus Davis.
Whoa, I would have sworn you were going to go with Howard. I thought you were saving that till the end.
Nope.
All right, Jefferson C. Davis. I like it.
Jefferson C. Davis, who is not to be confused with President of the Confederacy, though they share the same name. This is a Union general. And he's most well known for murdering a superior officer in 1862, but also Ebenezer Creek. So I picked him because I wanted to show that bad on the Union side too. We can't just sit here and say like, oh, all the Union soldiers are good. They're getting, And I could have went with Kilpatrick, and I was thinking about Slocum, but then I thought, no, I'm gonna go with Jefferson C. Davis, who was on Sherman's March to the Sea. So he, like anybody else, he's got distinguished service in Mexico, which earned him very high prestige at the outbreak of the Civil War. He's got a pretty good track record going into it. So he's born in Indiana in 1828. So he's one of the younger ones. He's actually born the same year as Pettigrew. So he's one of the younger ones in the Civil War. He dies November 30th, 1879 at the age of 51. So it's kind of a young age to die. But in the Civil War, he's in Missouri for the beginning of it. And he ends up getting ill in the late summer of 1862. And it was probably caused by exhaustion. And he wrote to his commander, who was General Rosecrans at the time, requesting a few weeks late leave. And he stated that after 21 months of arduous service, I find myself compelled to physical weakness and exhaustion to ask for a few weeks respite from duty. Rosecrans offers him that on August 12, 1862. And so he heads home to rest and recuperate from that. But the big thing that happens with him is killing of General Nelson, his superior.
Yeah, that's an interesting story.
And apparently it happened at a place called the Galt House. And that was where Buell and Nelson were both commanding from. Nelson dismissed Davis and said, Davis came in to approach Nelson asking for an apology for what had happened. Nelson had offended him previously. And Nelson just says to him, "Go away, you damned puppy. I don't want anything to do with you." And Davis took in his hand a registration card, and while he confronted Nelson, he took his anger out in the card, first by gripping it and then wadding up in a small ball, which he took and flipped in Nelson's face. It's starting to get personal at this point.
It's like at the mine that night.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Well, then he ends up shooting him, and he ends up dying. The shot occurred at 8 a.m., and by 8:30, Nelson was dead. So he ends up killing him. Davis didn't leave. He did not run or evade capture. He was just simply taken into military custody, and he's confined to the Galt House. He ends up just getting off for whatever reason. He's not really charged with anything at all. And meanwhile, he's murdered his superior officer.
It's amazing stuff like that happens. I mean, a lot of these guys, there are people getting executed for leaving camp, these soldiers, these poor guys. And there's a guy who kills his boss in cold blood in public in a hotel at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And he probably gets put in time out for a little while and says, "Don't do it again."
Exactly.
Although his punishment is probably no more harsh than the real Jefferson Davis, if you're really thinking about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Geez, talk about oh, you're in prison for what, 3 years? Okay, we're going to let you go. And then he goes and lives in Canada for a while. He never receives a full promotion higher than Brigadier General of Volunteers just because of the whole murder thing, right? Because they're that's kind of a stain on your record. So.
Yeah, if your Achilles stab you, that kind of affects your career path, I think.
Yeah,
I think that's
exactly.
Kind of how it works.
But he does receive a brevet promotion to Major General of Volunteers on August 8th, 1864, just for his service at the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. And then he is commanding officer of the, what's XIV? I can't read my Roman. 14th, thank you.
Oh, wow. I knew the math wasn't big, Mary, but my God.
No,
it's okay. That's
the Atlanta campaign, which he will be in that role until the end of the war. The other thing, too, that is against him is during Sherman's march to the sea at Ebenezer Creek. He pulls up the pontoon bridges. I mean, they say it was because he had to keep going. But this is a guy that has a track record of ruthlessness towards former slaves. He's exhibited throughout the march. Sherman knows it about him and turns a blind eye. Jefferson C. Davis pulls up the pontoons, and all these freed slaves that have been traveling with them throughout the march, they end up drowning.
A lot of them drowned. Yeah. A lot of them get recaptured by the cavalry from the Confederacy that were chasing them from behind. So it's in, and this is old people, children, women. But again, you talk about Sherman. He talked, again, I know this isn't really a Sherman talk, but at the beginning of his march to the sea, he had a chance to have some prisoner exchanges with some guys from Andersonville. He turned them down because he only insisted on healthy people. Mm-hmm. To join it. He wouldn't trade for any invalids.
Yep. He does turn a blind. He turns a blind eye, kind of this thing, and I'm sure we'll talk about it more next week in our episode about the March to the Sea. Actually, I think Ebenezer Creek warrants a whole episode in itself, just because I've heard people say, oh, well, he had to pull them up because he had to keep going. It's like, well, I don't know. Maybe I'm looking at it as somebody from the 21st century, but given Jefferson C. Davis's track record and all that, like, I mean, I get it. He seems like he was a pretty talented commander, but as a human, considering the two men leading the left and the right wings, Slocum and Howard, are abolitionists. This guy here is more in line with, hate to say it, how Sherman is.
Yeah, it's more Blackjack Logan than O. Howard.
Exactly.
Too.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's probably why it was easy for Sherman to turn a blind eye. I can't imagine that somebody like Howard or Slocum would look upon something like this or even be able to do something like this. But he does it twice, not just at Ebenezer Creek, but another creek as well.
Yeah, I mean,
that happens twice.
A decision like that, though, Mary, isn't one that a guy like him comes up with on his own.
No, I know.
He got ordered to do that by somebody.
Yeah.
And so if it was Howard or Slocum, they got those positions. Why? Because they took orders and they didn't mess around.
Mm-hmm.
Who knows?
I think he was on the left wing. He's under Slocum, which actually, right, given what I know about Slocum, it kind of shocks me that, he would have went ahead to make that decision. And I know, like, it was hard for them to keep the slaves with them because of food and all that. But, I think it's a very controversial thing about the March to the Sea, and one that I don't think we'll ever know the full story behind it. But like, I just kind of saw that and that murder of Nelson as kind of being like one of those, like, oh, this guy's got kind of stains on his career. So after the Civil War, he commands forces out in California and Oregon during the Modoc War of 1872-1873, and he ends up during the 1877 general strike. He commands 300 men and 2 Gatling guns in St. Louis. He ends up passing away in Chicago, Illinois on November 30th, 1879, and he's buried in Indianapolis, Indiana. So that is my pick, Jefferson C. Davis.
I think if I'm casting my Santa Claus judgment, I got to give him Colmare. I think I have to. I mean, just the fact that he killed the guy, actually, it's kind of an easy one. Of course, he's going to get freaking call me. Ditch all those poor people. And again, just because you're ordered to do it and we assume that's what he was, doesn't mean that makes you a better person. So I think he's a guy. That's a good pick on your part, by the way. I think a lot of people don't realize, there was another Jefferson Jefferson Davis, and how he was, right? And to your point, we hear a lot about a lot of Confederate stories of things like this. You don't hear too many Northern stories. So no. Studying him will help give you a more 360 worldly view
exactly
of all these things.
Yeah, and that's why I picked him for this, was just because it's like, okay, well, everybody kind of, I mean, rightly so, like, rags all over the Confederacy. You hear the bad stories from there, but then, like, you don't hear the ones that happen in the Union. And Jefferson C. Davis is definitely one of them. Like, and I mean, you have to look at someone too, like Dan Sickles. He's committed murder, but apparently it was temporary insanity, according to Stanton. Sickles doesn't lift up a pontoon bridge and it results in the death of people.
No, I think that's probably a good assumption on your part. But again, you know what? That's why Lee said that, Sherman said war is a terrible thing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think it's a pretty good study. I think understanding the whole aspect of how Christmas really developed in the Civil War was a really good thing. And just understanding that it's still, it's always been a melancholy holiday. Yep. It's joyous, but you always think about the people who aren't with you anymore when you think of Christmas time, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or someone who's deployed somewhere, someone who's away. It makes you reflect. And I think to what we said earlier with Christmas is a holiday the Civil War really brought to make you realize the importance of home and family.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think what we're going through now, where we can't be with those that we love at Christmas, I think moving forward, it's going to make those other Christmases where we can be with them that much more special. You know what I mean? Like, I think we're going to see a lot more people get into the holiday spirit. I know, like, oddly enough, I'm embracing Christmas more than I have in a long time. Like, I've got a Christmas tree up this year because I want to see the lights, for what, like, it's pretty, to come home and see the Christmas tree on or whatever. And I'm just, trying to be as positive I can right now, because I know next year it's going to be even better.
And that's the whole thing. I mean, it always looks forward at the end of a tough year, beginning of a new year, and annually, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This has obviously been a very difficult year for a lot of people. Just like the snow is going to melt and the spring's going to come back again, the sun's going to come tomorrow, and that's how you can look at it. But you look at the bright side. What it does, Mary, it makes you appreciate what you have, and look forward to what's coming down the road. That's the big thing with these. And the Civil War really, it started with Thanksgiving and then went over to Christmas. It really brings that out, and that those same feelings still exist today, and they have ever since the Civil War.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I would agree.
So what's on tap, Mare?
We have our Facebook Live. If you're listening to this on Saturday morning, we have our Facebook Live at 10 o'clock. And then our next episode is going to be part 2 of our March to the Sea for Sherman. And we don't know, that might actually end up being a threesome. We might end up spending a third episode talking about Sherman's march and historical memory.
So I think there's a lot of good stuff. So we have our Facebook Live. It's at 10 o'clock. That'll be awesome, like you said. Hopefully the round table, everyone enjoyed that, because it'll be past tense when this thing drops. We'll be talking about books. And if you weren't on that, shame on you. You get the coal too. But no, if you can't make it, that's great. We're going to do it every third Wednesday of the month at 6 p.m. We'll talk about different things. So we actually have a subject this time. We're going to talk about books. So, and then next week, Mary, you know who comes out of his rabbit hole?
Sherman.
He comes back. He shows up in Savannah. So part 2 of the Sherman's March to the Sea, we're going to talk about that. And I have a feeling, Mary, he's going to get Savannah. Just a feeling.
I did just say that it might be a threesome for us.
It might be a threesome. Yeah, nothing better than a threesome in Savannah, Mary. But I think it'll be a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to it. I think this was a good episode. It's nice that, you know what though, and honestly, it's good to step away a little bit from the nonstop casualty numbers and this, because it's just, especially around this time of year, you definitely want to, like we said, appreciate the stuff and have a lighter episode. This is fun doing this. This was a good time doing this. And I think it'll be fun. Our second annual Christmas McClaws Spectacular will be even better. Yeah. Maybe we'll sit outside in the snow somewhere for that one. But in any case, this was good. So I think put a bow on this one. Actually, bell. Jingle bells on this one, Mary. And get ready to go to bed. Well, Santa's packing up his sleigh right now, loading up toys for me and coal for you. And
because I've been naughty apparently.
Well, you're up there with them at the North Pole up there, aren't you? You're probably helping him. You're dressed as the elf. You probably help him build some toys right now.
Well, I am.
That makes sense. At least you're doing something. At least you're staying busy. It must be a slow ice cream season at the old DQ.
It is.
So doing something different. So anyways, this is fun. So I look forward to the next one. We'll hopefully have a great rest of the week, Mary. We look forward to talking to you at the round table, but especially on the live, we have a lot of fun with those. Yeah. So any parting words for you? Ho Howard.
No, just thanks everybody for your support through these 18 episodes, as well as coming out with the Facebook Lives and joining us for the roundtables. And I guess this would be like kind of this is actually going to be our like Merry Christmas to everybody, because our next episode will drop next Saturday, which is
that's right,
December 26th. So hope all of you have a very Merry Christmas.
Have a safe Christmas, drink lots of eggnog and lots of cookies and everything else you do. Hope you have a safe holiday. And I promise that Christmas 2021 is going to be better.
It definitely will.
I guarantee you it will be. So, Mary, again, the pleasure. We look forward to talking to everybody else. So thanks for watching and listening, everybody. It's a lot of fun doing this. And we will see you once again on the other side.
See you later, guys.
Peace out.
Bye.
Ho, ho, ho.